Good evening. This is Maestro Cretella with a Dawn of War 2 Retribution Elite modcast. Today we have a 1v1 on Outer Reaches. Our first player is Maestro Cretella, playing as Sindri, Trollface, Chaos Sorcerer. And Chaos Sorcerer is a spell-casting hero. He has long-range spells like Doom Bolts, he can teleport, he also has some crazy shenanigans and trickster spells in Tier 2 and Tier 3. My opponent is Treehugger, playing as the Tyranid Lictor Alpha. The Tyranid Lictor Alpha is an infiltrating melee hero, very, very powerful and very, very annoying. So this matchup right here, Treehugger is a player who, to be honest, I don't know at all. But I looked at his profile before we played, and he had something like 1,400 hours. And as you'll see throughout the course of this game, he was certainly no slouch. But I've been starting to play 1v1 again. I haven't been doing it for a very long time. Used to do a lot of 1v1 retail in 1v1 ranked in retail, not so much these days, since usually I just join custom games and they are usually 2v2 or 3v3. But I've been starting to play it again, getting a little tired of 3v3 and wanting to play 1v1 more. 2v2 is still a pretty awesome game mode. But we have our matchup right here is the Lictor Alpha versus the Sorcerer. This is a matchup that is, according to Excalibur, the famous sword of legend, it is the Sorcerer's hardest matchup. It is apparently an extremely difficult matchup. And I'm also, for this cast, I will be doing a little bit more calm analysis rather than a lot of play-by-play, and this will probably be a calmer and less excited replay. Now, I don't have as much experience playing Tyranids as Excalibur, and I, of course, don't have as much experience just playing the game, period. And I don't feel like I know this matchup that well, but the few times that I have played it, the challenge that I find, or at least one of the challenges, is that the Lictor Alpha will one-to-one beat any single unit that I have. It will beat the Heretics, it will beat the Chaos Space Marines, and it will beat the Sorcerer. So to fight the Lictor Alpha, if you actually want to fight the Lictor Alpha, you often have to commit more than just one unit. And that is ultimately making you fight a little inefficiently, since you're committing 2 or even 3 units just to deal with the Lictor Alpha. And then that leaves many of the other units either unopposed or without enough units to fight the other units. I mean, luckily, the Termagants and the Hormagaunts aren't nearly as threatening as the Lictor Alpha. However, these Spore Mines are extremely threatening, and that's why I kind of just retreated there. And I'm not entirely sure if that was a good choice. But I also just know that the huge risk associated with leaving your Heretics in a position where they could potentially get hit with Spore Mines. It's something I've learned from personal experience the hard way, getting Heretic squads wiped from full health by Spore Mines. And that's one of the reasons that getting a set of Spore Mines as your opening build as a Tyranid player can be extremely effective against any Chaos player, regardless of the Chaos hero, but probably especially against the Sorcerer. And what can happen is, if the Spore Mines get in range of Heretics, they can detonate once, take the Heretics down to, I believe, less than half health. Even if you retreat immediately, the Spore Mines can pursue you in retreat, pursue your Heretics in retreat, and just straight up wipe them right there. So right there, I go in, I lay in with some Doom Bolts, but Treehugger has already upgraded to Pheromones to allow him to reinforce, and I think that's a very good choice. I think it's a very good counter to the Doom Bolts, in this matchup, since Doom Bolts can be extremely good for whittling down Tyranid units so that they need to return to base. And that Pheromones, although Treehugger would still be bleeding, it's going to give him a lot more staying power and allow him to stay on the field instead of needing to retreat. Here it looks like I am going to lose my Sorcerer quite unintentionally. My attention is quite simply elsewhere, which is unfortunate since I actually went into this match with a plan, and already it's starting to fall apart a bit. First of all, by losing that Sorcerer. The other part of my plan is going with this huge extended Tier 1 build. I have double Chaos Space Marines and double Heretics, as well as a squad of Chaos Raptors. Now, the reason for doing this, usually Chaos players, for their opening builds, they either make a decision between either getting double Chaos Space Marines or double Heretics. There are advantages and disadvantages to both. The double Heretics is probably the stronger build overall. It's a lot harder hitting. It has more impact. It's very good for stopping early melee units. The double Chaos Space Marines, the disadvantage of going double Heretics is that you don't have more than one source of range DPS, which makes it very, very difficult to deal with single entities, basically heroes, especially tanky melee heroes or just any kind of melee hero. So I'm building both to give myself both the ability to deal with melee units as well as the ability to focus fire single heroes and single entities such as heroes. Now the disadvantages that come along with that is that I'm giving myself both the inevitable bleed of having double Heretics as well as having the high upkeep of having double Chaos Space Marines, not to mention even more upkeep as a consequence of having Chaos Raptors. But the reason I am going with this build is to try to give myself as much early fighting power as I can without really caring about whether or not my opponent beats me to tier 2. And my opponent does beat me to tier 2. And I expected that, and I did not care. And that's something that is hard to apply to any other, really to most of the races in the game, to not even care about your opponent beating you to tier 2. But the reason I'm trying it in this case is the fact that Tyranids are the only race that cannot rush with a vehicle. They only have that Tyrant Guard, which is not quite a vehicle and is still very fightable, even if you're still in tier 1. As you can see, my opponent is getting into tier 2. Now, he actually has a bigger economic advantage over me than I had really originally intended, since I had a very, very rocky opening. I gave up my power, gave up my Sorcerer in a fight, so I'm actually... things are not quite going according to plan. And my plan may not really be a good one. It may be one that is replying too much for me to play perfectly, but I've also just had some very weak plays. So some Doom Bolts going down. But again, this Lictor Alpha is just especially difficult to deal with because he has, right now, he has those feeder tendrils, which are going to make him very, very strong in melee. He will pretty much beat a single Heretic squad. He will pretty much just bleed the models. He will be getting fed experience, and he probably won't even get forced off the field. Now, I can try swarming him with 2 Heretics and then focus firing with Chaos Space Marines, but again, that's a part where the way I'm fighting would be very, very inefficient. It's unfortunately just very, very hard to take this Lictor Alpha down, as well as to control him. Now, one of the potential answers that I think Tex has said is almost like you need to do it, is you need to get a Havoc. And that's certainly a potential answer that allows you to control the Lictor Alpha regardless of the damage you deal. But what's tough about that is the fact that the Lictor Alpha, as an infiltrating hero, can often just target. Geez, I'm just blanking out on what I'm trying to say. The Lictor Alpha can just target the Havoc under infiltration and then just force it off as the first unit. So here I'm trying to fight with those double Heretics, and I'm unfortunately having a lot of trouble. And I'm in part having a lot of trouble, I think, because of that Pheromones war gear from the Lictor Alpha, just allowing all of his units to reinforce right in the middle of a fight, making things very, very tough for me. Luckily, at least I was able to return the Gen Bash. I was able to get a full Gen Bash off on him. But I'm already quite economically behind, both as a consequence of not being able to hold my farm and losing my Sorcerer. And he's using his Lictor Alpha in a way that he's actually not really using the stealth capabilities of the Lictor Alpha that much. In a way, it actually doesn't really matter, because he's using his Lictor Alpha in a way that gives the Tyranid Bob a huge amount of staying power. The Pheromones both reduce the damage of enemy units and allow allied units to reinforce. It's actually an extremely powerful war gear. And I'm kind of losing fights because of it. I was hoping that the combination of having the Raptors jump in to suppress, sending in 2 squads of Heretics that would be doom blasting, would be enough for me to win my engagements, but it's turning out to not really be the case. And I think a lot of that has to do with the Pheromones war gear. And I'm sending my Heretics in, expecting them to win, and instead they're just bleeding a lot, and ultimately not achieving that much. And I'm actually not entirely sure what to do about this. I actually have to say. So I've been getting a little tired of 3v3, and I've been wanting to play 1v1s more. Of course, 1v1s are tougher in many different ways. You really need to come to terms with both your strengths and your weaknesses as a player. And this is very interesting. He sets down that pheromone cloud at the start of an engagement. So, and gets a little too close on my Chaos Raptors. My Raptors are already at half health, probably going to lose one model. They don't, but they need to retreat out of there, and now I'm just in a difficult position. Now, I still have one squad of Heretics right here. I have another one coming up. But again, what's tough about this it's not the Warriors, it's not the Hormagaunts, it's the Lictor Alpha. And what to do about the Lictor Alpha is just such a tough question for the Sorcerer in this matchup. Luckily, I'm bleeding a lot of models off the squads. I at least get in on the Termagants, and I'm able to fight everything else except for that Lictor Alpha pretty much. And I'm trying to focus fire him, but these Chaos Space Marines right now, they aren't really doing enough damage. And once that Lictor Alpha gets into melee, he can start regenerating his health. So Treehugger does have that Tyrant Guard. And obviously you can see he was ahead of me by a huge amount. He can actually... No, never mind. I actually tried to go for a Doombolt's kill on that Lictor Alpha, but Doombolt's not very good on retreat. But it was a desperate attempt, and it was something that I really needed. Unfortunately, I did not get it. But I did wipe a Termagant Brood from Treehugger as well, and he did replace it. He still has Spore Mines again, and that's something that's very good. I'm relying a lot on Heretics, and those Spore Mines really will negate my Heretics if I have to deal with them. Now again, one of the things that I had planned to do, was part of my plan, was that I didn't need to rush to Tier 2, and then even once I get to Tier 2, again, I don't need to worry about a vehicle. So my first upgrades that I had really planned to make were upgrades on Chaos Space Marines. That just increases their performance, it makes them better for dealing with the Lictor Alpha, and it actually makes them extremely good for dealing with the Tyrant Guard. And that's one of the good things in this matchup for Chaos, that if your opponent rushes with a Tyrant Guard, upgraded Chaos Space Marines are actually the counter, as opposed to in other matches where you want to delay upgrading Chaos Space Marines to make sure that you have a counter for a vehicle ready. Now here, I'm also using the Summoning Circle Global to try to counteract. This is actually my own idea, using the Summoning Circle Global in combination with Heretics so that they reinforce in the middle of a fight. Now, unfortunately, it's a huge... it's incredibly confusing, and I actually straight up lose a Heretic squad since that Summoning Circle was not working out quite as well as I had hoped. Also, the fact that I'd say the pheromones probably just ended up being straight up better than the Summoning Circle, because not only are they reinforcing, but they're also giving that damage reduction to all of my units. So I lost that engagement. I did manage to take out the Tyrant Guard, which is just one of the examples of, again, in this matchup, you don't have to worry about a vehicle. And instead of delaying Chaos Space Marine upgrades to make sure that you have a vehicle counter, as would probably be a good idea in just about any other matchup, I can actually get those Chaos Space Marine upgrades, and if he decides to go with the Tyranid Tier 2 vehicle, which is the Hive Tyrant, which is not even really a vehicle, he will actually get kind of screwed in that sense, because upgraded Chaos Space Marines actually just counter the Tyrant Guard. Now, unfortunately here, it looks like I might get a wipe on the Lictor Alpha, so a nice little win for me, considering I'm behind. Still behind. Unfortunately, I tried to do that thing where I made that long Tier 1, but my opponent is getting to Tier 3 way ahead of me. I'm not even close to being there. Or at least, I probably could go there in 100 requisition, but it would really be more important for me to stay in Tier 2 and get out new units. So that strategy with the Summoning Circle is something that I have been experimenting with lately. It's something in particular that I've been trying because of the fact that in the next update, subjugated units will be invulnerable, which means the subjugation to Imperial Abyss combo will be completely irrelevant. So I've been trying to think of other uses for red, since, to be honest, using an Imperial Abyss on non-subjugated units is somewhat of a waste, especially in 1v1. since it's one of the most easily avoided nukes simply by straight up retreating. Now I'm going for a Blood Crusher, and I'm doing that for a number of reasons. It's actually something that is not part of my plan. This is more of an adjustment to my plan, because I realized that, I mean, part of it's because I lost so many units. I lost my Raptors, I lost a squad of Heretics, and I need something. And I need something that will really have some nice game impact. And I think this will have nice game impact, because the only counter that Treehugger has to it, the only, well, not even the only counter, but the only thing that can really do damage to my Blood Crusher currently is the Warrior Brood, and to a much lesser extent the Lictor Alpha. But the Lictor Alpha, that's actually one of the few things that will straight up beat the Lictor Alpha 1-to-1, is a Blood Crusher. So I can, right now in fact, my Blood Crusher is somewhat, I'd say, relatively unopposed, and it's basically the only thing he really has to do damage to it are the Warrior Broods. And the Blood Crusher will still win over the Warrior Brood, it will bleed models, and I can also just use that charge to disrupt them and even put them in a very, very dangerous situation where I could even potentially wipe them. I charge them at half health, they're getting chased down by Khorne Chaos Space Marines and Heretics, and there I actually just straight up wipe. The Warrior Brood. And that puts me in a much more comfortable position. Unfortunately, there are ways in which I'm in an extremely uncomfortable position. For one, there's the fact that I just had my power node decapped. I'm in a poor position economically. My opponent still has a full power farm and is well into tier 3 and is almost at the point where he could start putting Carnifexes and or a Swarm Lord out on the field. And I have recaptured my power node, or my power point, my power farm, and I'm actually re-noding it, and that's something in hindsight I'm not sure was such a great idea, since I certainly don't actually need the power, but I guess I was more concerned about it being decapped so easily. Right here I also have Sorcerer upgrades. There is the Icon of Tzeentch. I did a little Warp Fire, which did not work, but here's some Dark Flames exploding and actually fully wipe out that Termagant squad. So I definitely got some nice wipes. So in some ways I've recovered somewhat decently, mainly on the power of a few squad wipes, but I'm obviously not in a good position with a Carnifex now hitting the field, and I really don't have adequate answers for it. And again, we have this challenge here where the Lictor Alpha, an upgraded Lictor Alpha, is just going to straight up beat an upgraded Chaos Sorcerer. And I'm running away because I don't want to... I want to keep my Sorcerer on the field, but he just can't fight the Lictor Alpha. It's just not going to work. Now here I try to retreat my Sorcerer. I do get some knockback on the Lictor Alpha, but he takes out my Sorcerer anyway, and now I have this Carnifex to deal with, and unfortunately I don't quite have anything to deal with the Carnifex. My Blood Crusher can do damage to the Carnifex, but that is quite clearly a losing fight. So two fights are going on, the Carnifex versus the Blood Crusher. Now the Blood Crusher actually does pretty good damage. Took that unupgraded Carnifex down to about half health. And I'm even getting in a position where I'm getting very close to wiping some Hormagaunts. I probably should have tried for a Dark Flames again, although it may have been on cooldown, and I probably could have wiped those Hormagaunts as well. Now again, I've been using that Summoning Circle as an on-the-field reinforcement, synergizing particularly well with Heretics. Unfortunately, it's a double cap against me. He does have that back-capping Lictor Alpha. The Carnifexes are pretty tough to deal with, in part because they're going to beat a lot of things straight up in 1v1, especially now with a Thornback Carnifex. It's going to clearly beat the Blood Crusher. And as well as the fact that Tyranids tend to be very good, actually, at disrupting and tying up sources of AV. And that's one of the things that's very strong about Tyranids as well as Carnifex plays. Well, that's true for a number of reasons. First of all, we have this Lictor Alpha. He can infiltrate. Treehugger has not even really been using the Lictor Alpha much as an infiltration hero, but he still has that option, and that's something that still can be very strong. If I try to have a Carnifex, I mean, if I try to have a las cannon to deal with the Carnifex, it will get snuck up on by this Lictor Alpha, and the Lictor Alpha will very, very quickly bleed something like a Havoc, and if I don't retreat the Havoc, I'm probably going to lose the Havoc. And then once I retreat the Havoc, I'm missing a source of AV to deal with something like a Carnifex. Now here is something I'm trying to do that unfortunately is really, really not going to work out well for me. Now, I chose with my double cast Space Marine upgrades to put one as the Mark of Khorne and one as the Mark of Tzeentch. Now, my thinking for that was that I wanted the Mark of Khorne because I wanted something that could actually one-to-one take on the Lictor Alpha. Now, that is normally actually true, even with the feeder tendrils. What is making it no longer true is the fact that the Lictor Alpha now has the Lone Hunter upgrade, which gives him a 50% damage buff. That's huge, a 50% damage buff, as well as a 25% damage reduction to himself. Now, this is only when he is by himself, but I'm talking about a situation where I wanted to have a unit that would be able to beat the Lictor Alpha by itself. And that was the Khorne-cast Space Marines. That was true when the Lictor Alpha did not have the Lone Hunter, but now it is no longer true, and I can't win those one-to-one fights. So again, it's going to take... I would need to commit more than one unit to taking out that Lictor Alpha, which would make... that would also just make my army very inefficient. And that's one of the things that's so tough about the Lictor Alpha, that he can force your opponent into inefficient plays, because there aren't many efficient ways to deal with him. And now, I guess, in hindsight, it really would have been better for me to go for double Tzeentch cast Space Marines. Now, right here, I'm trying to push to take out that Carnifex with the Blood Crusher, actually. Of course, that Blood Crusher would lose in a normal fight, and if he actually turned around and just fought the Blood Crusher, he would actually lose the Carnifex. Now, I'm pushing for the Blood Crusher in the base. Now, what we can see here is I'm trying to kill the Carnifex anyway, but unfortunately, because it's a monstrous creature, the base healing is actually too fast, and I couldn't take out that Carnifex, even though it only had 36 health left. So that was a very, very close call. I do manage to take out Hormagaunts from Treehugger. And this is actually the Lictor Alpha still being extremely oppressive, just going in base. Again, in part, he is able to do that because of that Lone Hunter upgrade being so incredibly powerful, just molesting my units inside my base, even when they have a 50% damage reduction. But just with that Lone Hunter upgrade just becoming so powerful, I think Tex has actually said that the Lictor Alpha becomes the most powerful melee hero in the game with that Lone Hunter upgrade. 50% damage. I mean, if we try to do the math. Alright, so if we do the math, that's actually coming out to roughly 100 DPS. That's actually slightly less than one of the Hive Tyrant's weapons, but he's also restoring his health, and it's still extremely good. And I mean, I guess part of it is that the Hive Tyrant's Crushing Claws are heavy melee, so against heavy armor, this is the most powerful. This is pretty much one of, if not the most powerful weapons in the game against heavy armor, since it's with that 50% damage buff, it's going to be at about 100 DPS, and that becomes the new base. And then you get another 30% increase, so it would be doing about 130 DPS to power armor units. That being said, the Chaos Space Marines, I believe, do have melee resistance. Now, I've pretty much wiped most of Treehugger's regular units. Unfortunately, now I have to deal with Carnifexes. And that's unfortunately one of the things that scares me about Tyranids, is that even if you are actually wiping squads, wiping units like Termagants and Hormagaunts especially, I often feel like you're just clearing their population and their upkeep so that they can just bring out the Tier 3 train of Carnifexes. And of course, one of the Carnifexes level 2, giving it even more health, making it very, very tough to deal with. And he's using that Lictor Alpha to backcap. The Lictor Alpha is all by itself. And again, this is a very, very tough play to deal with, because I guess I could commit most of my forces to fighting the Lictor Alpha, and I now have things that can actually take on the Lictor Alpha head-to-head. Things like this Chaos Dreadnought. Unfortunately, I am no longer satisfied with my Khorne-cast Space Marines. They are such a beastly unit, but they often can't take on... They still can't quite take on full-on melee heroes. They are extremely good for taking out heroes in retreat, and especially non-melee heroes. Unfortunately, with that Lone Hunter upgrade, the Lictor Alpha really does become a full-on tanky melee hero. Now I have some Plague Marines. I'm getting that as an AV answer. The Plague Marines are a unit that I've had varying feelings about throughout the course of the game. There was a time when I thought they really were not good, and then a little more recently I was coming to see many more of their virtues, but I'm also, again, starting to realize some of their shortcomings. Now, I'm just in a position where I can't fight these things. Like, he just has a superior fighting force, but I'm still trying to stay in the game with back caps, playing that 1v1 passive-aggressive war. Now, the virtues of the Plague Marines are obviously the snare. They are an AV weapon that does not need to set up. A big thing is also just their staying power. I use the Warp Global there to get my my Plague Marines in closer, since that Carnifex was getting away. Unfortunately, it had gotten away entirely. Now we have an unupgraded Carnifex. Now, some of the limitations, the biggest limitation of the Plague Marines is actually just their damage. I don't remember exactly their damage. Well, actually, I remember both of the figures that I have seen for their damage, but I think there was some discrepancy about which one was actually the true figure. Now, one figure I saw for the damage of the Plague Marines was about 10 DPS, which is very low. The other figure I've seen for them was 19 DPS, which is better, but still pretty low. Considering I think the buffed las cannon in Elite does about 40 DPS. A Tzeentch Dreadnought does 46 DPS, a las cannon Predator does 55. So, as a source of AV, the Plague Marines are one of the worst as far as actual damage. Let's take a look at my Sorcerer. Now, unfortunately, I actually lost the Dreadnought right there. I should be able to take out this Carnifex, and I'm doing again that play with the Summoning Circle, and I'm going to get a very nice play off here if you see it. We have a Warp Fire. That was a Warp Fire from the Rod of Warpfire, and actually took out both a Warrior Brood and a Gene Stealer. So that was nice, and I took out that Carnifex. And I'm still trying to play that passive-aggressive war. I have my Khorncast Space Marines. One of the good things about Khorncast Space Marines is that they do make very good backcappers. They have 6 speed because they get a speed buff. And they can also, 1-to-1, they will beat most of the units in this game. Unfortunately, the Lictor Alpha is not one of them. Gene Stealers probably are not one of them either, and the Carnifex are quite obviously not something that Khorncast Space Marines will be beating 1-to-1. Nevertheless, I'm still trying to use them as a backcapper just because I have them. Unfortunately, I'm double blob capping, and I'm about to get I'm gonna get a double cap. It doesn't look like this triple cap is gonna go off since the Carnifex is just on top of my Tzeentch Chaos Space Marines. And here I have that Lictor Alpha again. Now, unfortunately, one of the things that I'm really doing wrong, I did not notice in the game that he had switched to the Lone Hunter, although it was something I had recognized after, when I realized that my Khorncast Space Marines were no longer beating the Lictor Alpha. Now, I've actually gotten double Plague Marines. Now, this is something where it has its virtues, it also has its limitations. You get AV that has a lot of staying power since Plague Marines have a lot of staying power, although you are paying for that staying power with a lot of bleed, since Plague Marines cost 56 requisition to reinforce as well as 5 power. That's quite a bit. They have a power cost to reinforce, which is nothing to laugh at. Unfortunately, it's about to be a double cap against me. Now, with 2 Plague Marines, you actually have the snare, I believe, stacks. So you get a lot of slow, a lot of snare, and you basically just have a snared Carnifex. Which can be very good when you have a different source of follow-up AV that is actually more powerful. Unfortunately, the disadvantage of double Plague Marines is actually the fact that their damage is still relatively low. Now, especially if the true damage, the DPS of Plague Marines is that 10 figure that I said, then with 2 of them, you're only getting about 20 DPS, so that would mean that 2 Plague Marines would be doing still less damage than a single las cannon Havoc. Nevertheless, I take out the Carnifex. And I'm trying to stay in with back caps. But my Tzeentch Chaos Space Marines are just not going to be able to take on those Gene Stealers. And to be honest, I'm not even sure if my Heretics can. Maybe with another Summoning Circle, but it's probably on cooldown, or it's not, and I'm going to use it right now. And that is something that could actually win this engagement for me, since my Heretics will start reinforcing on the field. And I might even take out the... Oh, I get very close to taking out that Gene Stealer, but just didn't quite happen. So I'm at least going to get a double cap back up, but it's obviously I have very few VPs, and now the Lictor, we both have a level 9 Lictor Alpha as well as a level 1 Lictor. And the funny thing about this Lictor is that there was a time when I looked at the Lictor and the regular Lictor, and I was like, huh, it almost seems like it's better than the Lictor Alpha. And I mean, in some ways it is. It has 1,250 hit points, which is quite a bit. It actually starts out with a higher base DPS, although right now the Lictor Alpha definitely has a much better DPS. In retail, it did heavy melee damage. In Elite, it's supposed to do power melee damage, although I once heard that there was some kind of bug with that. And now it's just on my point. And one of the things that's funny about this is that it's capping my point, and I'm having trouble forcing it off just because it's so tough. Alright, and I'm starting another cap off. I've managed to white out the VPs at 8 to 175, but unfortunately it looks like he definitely has his natural VP. And he's going to get the top one back, so that's got to be a GG. But just some interesting things. This is a matchup that was supposed to be very tough, and it certainly feels very tough. The biggest thing that really feels tough about it is just that Lictor Alpha, pretty much just that Lictor Alpha. And it's something I've been noticing, that the Lictor Alpha just seems to be a very strong 1v1 hero, period. Because he is so powerful in melee, because he can be so powerful in melee and he can infiltrate, and also because of a lot of other things. Those Spore Mines early on, especially since he has a Spore Mine call-in in addition to be able to buying Spore Mines from base. And that Pheromones Warrior turned out to be very challenging as well. So, as you can see, I did not win that game. That was a very challenging game. In any case, I hope you enjoyed the cast, hope you enjoyed some of the insight into it. And there are just some things, like, specifically with the Sorcerer, some things that people don't quite get with him when they don't actually play him, which is that fact of one of the reasons it's so tough to deal with those tanky melee heroes as the Sorcerer is, first of all, he has less range DPS coming out of most of his opening builds, certainly compared to other races that can more cheaply put more ranged units on the field, as well as possibly even more important is the fact that the Sorcerer himself can't take on a Lictor Alpha, can't take on a hero like the Lictor Alpha head to head. Just putting the Sorcerer in against the Lictor Alpha will just straight up be a losing battle. But in any case, hope you enjoyed the cast. Have a good night.